Faces of Kentucky, Chapter 2, page 15, Starting a State. In its early days, Kentucky became a middle ground. The area served as a crossroads where different groups met. Native Americans hunted the land. From the north and west, small numbers of French explorers came to the region. A few Spanish arrived from the south. From the east, Virginians and other English colonists, and African Americans with them, entered Kentucky. It was a multicultural society from the start. When groups made peaceful contact, they could see how they had changed each other's lives. By then, Indian villages with their cabins and walls looked very much like English forts. Indians and Europeans wore similar clothes on the frontier. All used the Native American moccasin. They combined European clothing with Indian items. Quickly, the native people started using the rifle more and the bow and arrow less. There were not clear divisions among the different groups of people. Just as the English fought the French, different Indian tribes fought each other. Sometimes one tribe would support the French, while another would go with the English. As the Europeans divided, so did the Native Americans. When they came together, they did so to trade. Barter formed the basis of their economy. The Europeans would bring cheap jewelry, metal goods, weapons, mirrors, strong drink, and more. The Indians would bring deer skins, beaver furs, or other things to trade. They would then talk back and forth, bartering until they agreed on a trade. Even though the two worlds, European and Indian, were much alike, they also differed. Those differences would make conflict resolution difficult. When the two peoples disagreed, each needed to try to compromise to avoid fighting. That was difficult. People often died when a compromise was not reached. Europeans in Kentucky most often made contact with the Shawnee tribe of Indians. The Shawnee lived in Ohio and hunted and traded in Kentucky. They built houses about 20 feet long, covered in tree bark. From these homes, men went to hunt and women went to farm. The Shawnee said that no one owned the land. That idea caused part of the conflict. The Shawnee raised their children to be tough. They tied babies to cradle boards to make sure they would grow straight and strong. The boards also left a flat spot on the backs of Shawnee heads. Shawnee mothers bathed their children in cold water every day, even in winter, to harden them. Overall, Shawnee women had much more freedom than women in the English homes, and therefore some European women captured by the Shawnee did not want to return to their own people. Because so many members of the tribe had died of disease, the Indians often adopted white captives into their tribes. They treated a captive as an equal part of the family. The settlers usually did not treat captured Indians in the same way. But the major conflicts came over animals and land. Simon Girty was a white man who had switched sides to lead the Indians. He spoke to a group of tribes and told them why they should fight. The Indians from all tribes have had a right to hunt and kill these wild animals. But, brothers, the Long Knives, the people from Virginia, have overrun your country and your hunting grounds. They have killed the deer and the buffalo, the bear and the raccoon. Unless you rise and kill their whole race, you may say goodbye to the hunting grounds of your fathers. Because at the same time the English coming to Kentucky showed little desire to do anything other than take and occupy the land, conflict followed. Document 2.1. Daniel Trabue came to Kentucky in 1785. When he was 25 years old, later, near the end of his life, he lived in Columbia in Adair County. There he wrote down his memories of those early days. Here he tells about a talk he had with an Indian chief. It shows how the two groups held a different view of land. Spelling has been changed to the way we spell now. This chief said to me, "What do you want to take Indian land from them for?" I told him that we always bought their land and paid them for it. He said that he believed that the Great Spirit made all the people. He made all the land, and it was the Great Spirit's land. And it was wrong for Indian or white man to say it was his land. This was a lie. Now, said he, if Indian make house, it is Indian's house. If he make cornfield, it is his. But the land is the Great Spirit's. But, he said, the white man, he marks off the land in the woods and say it is his land. Said he, this is a lie. It is not his land. It is the Great Spirit's land. The first West. The different Europeans in North America, the French, Spanish, and English, had been in the land called Kentucky at various times. The English, however, would be the ones to settle the land. A century went by, though, from the time the first English came here before that happened. What made them delay? Page 18. Mary Ingalls. Mary Draper Ingalls may have been the first European woman in Kentucky, but she did not want to have that privilege. In 1755, she had a house in a pretty part of frontier Virginia. No English settlers lived in Kentucky, and none would live there for 20 more years. At that time, Mary was 23 years old and had been married for 6 years. She had 2 sons, Thomas, age 4, and George, a 2-year-old, and was expecting a third child at any time. Then, on July 8th, her happy life changed. That day, Indians raided her settlement. They killed several people and captured Mary Ingalls and her sons. 3 days after being taken, she gave birth to a girl. The next day, she got on a horse with her baby and rode on. Not to do so would have meant death. The Native Americans took her to their camp in Ohio. There, they took her sons away from her. 3 months later, the Indians and Mary Ingalls went to Big Bone Lick, in what is now Boone County in northern Kentucky, to get salt for their use. They forced her to leave her daughter behind. Mary decided that this might be her only chance to escape, and she fled. She went through the wilderness for 40 days. Mary Ingalls barely made it. Thorn bushes tore off most of her clothes. Her feet grew swollen and were cut. She had little food and became almost too weak to stand. Then, at last, Mary came to a cabin near her home. It had been nearly half a year since her capture. She was reunited with her husband, and they moved away from the frontier. Just days after they left, Indians attacked the house where they had been staying. The Indians killed or captured everyone there. Mary had almost become a prisoner again. Mary and her husband had 4 more children. One day, some people told her that her son Thomas, now 17 years old, had been located. He lived with a Native American family and could no longer speak English. After 13 years with the Indians, he did not want to leave. Finally, he did return to her, but he never fully liked his new life. Mary never saw her daughter or her other captured son again. Deeply saddened, she never was the same person as before. She lived to an old age for the time. She died at 83. So ended the life of the first non-Indian woman in Kentucky. Part of the reason for the delay had to do with geography. Geography concerns the Earth's natural features and how the land is made. Look at the map that shows some of the geography of Kentucky. Mountains form a barrier between the area farther east and Kentucky. Early explorers called those the Endless Mountains. We now call them the Appalachian Mountains. It was very hard to go across them. Most people went around them and came into Kentucky through a break in the mountains. They called the entranceway Cumberland Gap. Look at the map again. The other way to get to Kentucky was to go down the Ohio on a boat. Most people got off the boat at Maysville or Louisville or went up the Kentucky River and came to central Kentucky. Either trip brought the English explorers into contact with the Native Americans who lived in Kentucky and who later just hunted there. The Indians were a second reason it took a long time for the English to settle in Kentucky. Conflict between the two groups made Kentucky a dangerous place. The caption underneath the map 2.1, the mountain barrier made it hard to get to Kentucky. Cumberland Gap gave people a way to get across the mountains. The last paragraph on page 19. A third reason was that the English had plenty of land where they were, but as more people came to America from Europe over the years, they took more and more of the land, creating scarcity. New groups wanted land so that they too could farm and raise crops. The scarcity of land caused some to view Kentucky as a place where they could find land. Here they could fulfill their dreams. Kentucky would become the first area to be settled outside of the 13 English colonies. It was the first step westward for what became the United States. It had taken people more than a century to go just a few hundred miles inland from the ocean. Now, in just one more century, explorers and settlers would cover the whole continent. What took place in Kentucky set the stage for all later Western movement. Kentucky became the first West.